Good morning. I know,
The class at 12:15 on the schedule.
we've had mixed reviews as to whether we're starting at 12 or 12:15, so we're kind of in the middle, and if somebody shows up, all they got to hear was our little spiel about us, so that's all right. Good morning. So we're here this morning to, we good? We're here this morning to talk about what you can do as an organization to manage your risk. And it's well beyond, I work for an insurance broker, we deal with selling insurance, but if you're going to manage your risk, you have to think well beyond that. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And I have kind of highlighted things with Pete's help here into why we need to manage our risk. All of you are probably well aware of the exposures and the operations issues related to a restaurant being fast-paced. I've never been into a restaurant that had enough space to work in, so you got confined quarters that folks are working in the back of the house. Younger workers, higher turnover, maybe those two go hand in hand. You got wet floors, cut exposures, lift exposures. So with that, you're going to have some risk. You're going to have, and we're going to focus primarily on employee-related injuries and accidents. So that is a recipe for accidents and industries. Get it? Okay, that's as good as it gets from a risk management standpoint. So I'm going to make it easy. I realize that it's Sunday morning, and so I'm going to narrow things down to 3 things that you should be thinking about when you're trying to manage the risk for your operations. Number 1 is, and I think it's the most important, that's why I've got Pete here to talk about it, and that is integrating safety into your operations. You have to do that if you want to be successful, and I'll speak to that in a second. Number 2 is, I've never seen a company that had a good risk management program that did not have a very good accident investigation process. So we'll speak to that. And then lastly, if you want somebody to do anything, you have to hold them accountable. And so how are you holding them accountable? And then how are you allocating those costs associated to insurance and risk management? So those are our 3 things. Pretty easy, right? So when we talk about integrating into the operations, and I'm going to turn it over to Pete, I like to think, we happen to work with a good number of clients that make hamburgers. And if your operation is making hamburgers, multiple locations, wouldn't it be important that you have a quality, consistent burger no matter which location you go to? Somebody do like this. Yeah. And so early on in the process, you're going to educate your staff how thick those tomatoes need to be sliced to make the perfect hamburger, how thick the onions need to be sliced to make the perfect hamburger. And my point is, that is when you teach them about cut prevention. That before we do this, we put on our cut glove. Before we do this, we put on our sanitation glove. What you don't want to do is say, here's how we make a hamburger, here's the perfect hamburger, and then a week later watch a videotape on cut prevention. If you integrate it into the process, you're going to have a much greater likelihood for success, and it's sticking with that employee. And I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different restaurant clients over the years, and I could say that these guys at Rudy's, through their management processes, do it as good or better than anybody. If you said, tell me about your safety program, they would really start with, let us tell you about your operations and how we manage things from an employee injury, guest injury, and quality assurance for the operations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete and let him speak to operations. And he, too, with a little help, has narrowed that down to 3 things. So have at it. Thank you, Pete.
Well, good morning. I think I'm old enough to say that when I started in the business 42 years ago, safety was not a big issue for us. Safety, we didn't even know what safety was. It was kind of a free-for-all back in the mid-'70s if you were around then in the industry. So we've made a lot of progress in the years. In 1994, when we opened our first Rudy's in Albuquerque, we had 3 basic principles that we had. It was have great food with great service and a clean restaurant. And I think we all adhere to that every single day in this industry. That's all that really counts when you boil it down. What it's moved to in the last 24 years with Rudy's is the same thing. Great food, great service and a clean and safe restaurant. And when Mark asked me to help him with this presentation today, I go, that'd be easy. We're a safe place. We don't have a whole lot going on other than just being safe every day. And when I started looking at what we had done over the past 24 years at Rudy's, it was quite an accomplishment of what we've accomplished. We started with basically nothing. We were just barbecue guys in New Mexico, just cutting meat and having fun. And since then, I started digging. I go, well, this is a little more involved than what I thought I was going to be doing here, just saying, hey, we work safe, we teach safe, we orientate safe, we do everything safe. So I'm just going to run through what we do as a company, and then if y'all have any questions after we finish, then I'll be happy to answer those. But it obviously starts with day one with orientation. For an employee to actually get hired here at Rudy's, they have to pass a pre-employment test which shows their dedication and their desire to work for us. They get one shot. If they don't pass it, then we don't move further. If they do pass it, then they come to orientation, and literally one of the first things that we do after we do all the paperwork is we show two different videos. We show a video with health and sanitation, which obviously deals with food health and safety, and then we show a 12-minute video, just a safety video, which outlines everything basic to every restaurant we have here that y'all can show at your place. And then it breaks down from there into the different areas. We start with our employee handbook, which covers a myriad of things. The employee handbook is basically 18 pages of just the general outline of what we'll be covering during orientation. And they have to read that. It covers things from fitness for duty, which outlines if they get sick what they're supposed to do. Safety and health guide. It's got the reporting of incidents, which we'll cover extensively at the end of the presentation. It covers security, which is obviously safety. And then it wraps up with the workplace violence and those issues that happen. That's an entirely different topic. We're not going to cover too much today. That's going to be the HR end of things, and that's a whole nother session, which we're just working with workplace safety today. We require food handlers and TABC certification for every employee before they start. They can't come in and say, I'll get to it. Say, no, if you want to work, you need to get them prior to. Obviously, very important to know the alcohol safety, know food safety at a basic level before they get in, and we start working with them on those areas. It covers workplace violence, as I mentioned. Okay, next slide. That's just an orientation. Orientation is about a 2-hour process. We do everything digitally now. We have iPads. They sign electronically. We have an electronic record that they've read all the documents, that they agreed to all the documents, that they know what all the documents say. So at the later point in time, you can hold them accountable. When you get into the integrating the safety of operations, that's where all of our job really starts. That's what's hard on a daily basis, to make sure that everything we've covered, they're actually doing. And that's where we run into problems when we don't have accountability, when we don't have follow-up, when we don't have folks paying attention to what our employees are doing. That's where the problems start. So the new employee education starts day one with orientation. It moves to, once we get into their training and they've gone through orientation and they've gone through an 8-week training course, which all employees do, we get into safety and sanitation, which is, we have regular safety meetings. We have constant awareness of sanitation, like sanitation buckets for towels, for hand washing. We've got signs, we've got everything in place, but if there's no follow-up, they're not going to wash their hands if you're not saying, hey, you're not washing your hands. If you're saying, hey, that sanitation bucket is dirty, let's get it changed. Rudy's is very unique in the sense that we have fires burning 24/7, all day, every day. We have fires burning on Thanksgiving. We have fires burning at Christmas. We go through 2 to 4 cords of wood every week in every store. We have live coals on the back dock. We have live coals in the warming pit areas. We've got grease built up in our pits. We've got grease built up in our cutting areas. We have potential for fire every single day. So fire safety.
If I could, Pete, which becomes a challenge from telling our underwriters that they've got a fire burning 24/7. I just want that. It
That's
comes with
why
some
Mark's gonna be
challenges.
hard to fire. You know,
It's got some challenges.
well, luckily to say, we've never burned a place down. We've had our fair share of barbecue pit fires, but over the years, we've gotten much more adept at preventing those. We have those. I think the last one was last year sometime. And it's a lot of smoke, and there's a little bit of fire, but it's all self-contained, so it looks a lot worse than it is because it's just grease burning off. But if you're following your cleaning practices, we clean every pit every week with a pressure washer, nothing but water, so it stays sanitized. But if you don't do that, then as much meat as we go through with all that grease, it's easy to have a fire. So anyway, we have documents for oiler, which is our pits, oiler maintenance. We've got documents for our warming pits. And as we all know, it's so difficult to hold someone accountable, especially an hourly employee, for all these documents. It's hundreds of pages of documents that we expect for them to know, to understand, to follow. But at the end of the day, if we're not doing our job as managers to make sure that they're following all the regulations and policies that we have in place, it's going to be impossible to keep your restaurant safe. So at the end of the day, it's up to us to make sure things are safe. We've got documents for effective cutting techniques. Mark showed the picture with the cutting the onion with the cutting glove. You got to have cutting gloves. No cutting gloves, one slip. You got to cut on your finger. You're going to the ER. You're short a manager. You're short an employee. You're out cash. You're out. Who knows? It's just a domino effect when those accidents happen. So you've got to ensure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. Our recipe book includes safety and sanitation on every recipe. It includes the HACCP information on every recipe, which is your hazard analysis and critical control points. And once again, what employee is going to read that and remember it? It's our responsibility as managers to read it, to know it, to study it, to live it, to review it every day. And then we've also got quarterly safety-specific training, which is broken into over 2 years. We cover pretty much everything that is in our manuals, but every quarter we also have it posted. Every employee has to sign an acknowledgement that they've read it, they understand it. So just 3 of those are back injury prevention, how to lift properly, prevention of slips and falls, which is probably the number one. Everybody knows slips and falls, you hurt your back. Maybe they don't hurt their back, maybe they said they hurt their back. And then we've got fire prevention. So those are 3 of our major ones, just like everyone else, with the exception of maybe fire prevention for a restaurant that's not a barbecue restaurant. Then we get into what we do as a management team, which is what, without an effective management team, all those areas mean nothing. I mean, you can talk about it all day till you're blue in the face, but you really don't have time to do that because you're busy operating your restaurant. So you got to do it through orientation, you got to do it through ongoing training, and then you have to execute it through your management team, which is the most difficult area to adhere to and to follow up and make sure it happens. So what we do for educating our managers, they've got a restaurant safety guide which covers everything. And most of our managers, to backtrack a minute, most of our managers, probably 95% of all of our managers started as hourly employees. So we've raised them through the system. And so they've seen everything, all of this before. They know what it is, they've learned it, they've heard it, they've seen other managers train it, they've seen the accountability that everybody holds. So by the time they make management, they're fully aware of what's going on. So theirs is much more inclusive of everything and broken down to where it's understandable. So this safety restaurant manual has emergency operational procedures, power failure, loss of water service, winter storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, fire safety, fire prevention, restaurant security, crime prevention, points of entry, bomb threats, food sanitation, time and temperature, health inspections, on and on and on. So this is been developed over 24 years as well that has everything that's important to Rudy's. All of y'all will have things that are more important in your restaurants, but to have a very thorough, so a manager, if they do have a tornado coming, they can go straight to this manual and the process is lined out. What do I do to keep my employees safe, to keep my customers safe, to keep my building safe? But if you don't have a policy in place, we've got a couple stores in Oklahoma, and that's Hurricane Alley, or Tornado Alley. So it's important to have, wherever you have stores, you need to look and see what the challenges are in those areas, weather-wise, crime-wise, whatever it might be, and have a policy for that. But that starts number one. We've also got a lot of drivers. Every store has at least one vehicle for deliveries, for caterings. Most stores have more than one. They've got two, or they've got a vehicle and a trailer. And so fleet safety is, as you well know, these employees that we have, most of them are under 25, and think they're bulletproof. They think they're great drivers. In reality, they're not bulletproof, and they're not great drivers. So before anybody can drive for us, they go through an extensive background check, through a motor vehicle check, and once they're approved, then they go on the approved driving list. No employee can drive for us that's not already approved through this process. When that employee has an accident that's their fault, a $20 fender bender or a $4,000 major accident, they'll never drive for us again. So they know that it's their responsibility to drive safely, to move and represent Rudy's at all times. We get comments, go, hey, we saw this Rudy's car driving by, they're driving too fast, they're tailgating, they did this, they did that. And it's easy for us to go back and see who that was and educate so they don't do that again, so they're not in a position where they can't drive for us. Once an employee becomes management eligible, they go through an extensive background check, complete background check, which is a criminal background check, financial background check, driving background check, before they're ever eligible to become a full-time manager for us. Moving from there, we go to store inspections. We have a safety inspection guide that every store does every month. And once again, this is specific to Rudy's. It's been developed over the last 20 plus years to cover everything safety issues, from wet floors to missing caulk on windows to whatever you can imagine. Exposed conduits, exposed electrical, missing electrical plates, but that's done every single month, and that's presented to the area directors, and then eventually I see it as well. But they do that to pinpoint, obviously, any danger areas. And then also, once a month, every store has an area director inspection guide, which covers safety as well as every other aspect of the store. So they're required to do that as well, so that in conjunction with the monthly safety guide, we've got our safety pretty well covered. Then also, to make sure that everybody's being trained properly, every store is required to have quarterly training audits. And that's where the area director goes in and actually audits their training procedures, their training paperwork. All of our training's digital now, so our director of training has access to every single employee record. So I like to call ourselves high-tech barbecue. On the front of the house, we're just cutting and slicing and dicing. We got 10 meats, 10 sides, 5 desserts. Back of the house, we try to really take care of every single aspect of keeping Rudy's a safe, fun environment to work in. So that takes care of that. And then I think I'll leave the incident and accident investigation procedures for our conversation here in a minute.
Perfect.
But as overall, I was happy to see what we developed over the last 24 years when I dived into it, and I think that we have a really good track record of keeping our employees safe, our customers safe, our buildings safe, and we'll continue to improve and move and adjust as needed.
I'm glad I could allow you to make a tour through history. So when we have to present their risk to the marketplace, we needed to know all that stuff. And how many of you have on your recipe list how to do it safely and how to do it quality and sanitation? I mean, that kind of lets you know to the level of detail where they are as it relates to integrating safety. So thank you, Pete. So we're going to talk about The next step, the next ingredient that I mentioned at the outset, and that is an accident investigation process. It starts with you have to have a good form, and it needs to be your form. If you send me an email when we're done, I'll be glad to send you a form, but please don't place the word sample with the name of your company. You heard, how many times did Pete say, this is how we do it, but it would be different for you? Everybody's different. And so you need to customize it and make it your own. Otherwise, you're going to alienate the staff that's filling out your forms. Cause and prevention. A lot of times, folks fill out that form with the explicit purpose because they're going to have a claim. And I would encourage you that that's really a small piece of the process. You need to actually fill that out so that you make sure that same incident doesn't happen again. Prevention. And then lastly, managing the claims, and I'll speak to that. So this is my sample form. If you send me an email, I'll show you my email at the end. I'll be glad to forward it to you. And you really should, once you make it your own, make sure that everybody fills this out incomplete. Completely. Incomplete. Completely. With one exception. If you put in that box what caused the accident, the employee was careless, and what are they going to do to prevent it, be more careful. They really should just leave it blank, because that does absolutely nothing. We want something that caused the incident and something we can do to prevent it. And careless and being careful, and I'd be willing to bet if you have a few incidents at your operations, look at some of your accident forms and see how many times you see the word careful, careless. It doesn't help. We want something concrete that can address the exposure. So the form, come on. I am clicking here. There we go. The process that we like to see is a supervisor report, an employee report. The template that I have actually has a pictogram of the body so they can circle the part of the body that's injured. I want to know that because a week later they might say, it's the left shoulder that's injured. Like, how did that happen? It was the right wrist when we turned in the claim. And then a management review. If you have a safety committee, they can be part of that management review process. But it's basically a 3-step process. And what we want to do is follow that sequence of events. And I would encourage you to look at the unsafe acts that might lead to the incident. What and why were they doing that led to the accident? There might be some conditions, the wet floor, the knife, but why did that happen? What was the behavior that led to that? And that can really help your process. And so it just takes a little bit of education for your staff. This was an example here where we had an employee, this is a real world accident, they broke their left wrist from a puddle of water. And it says the roof leak caused a puddle of water, and what we needed to do to solve this problem was train the workers to clean up that puddle as quickly as possible. So I was actually doing a training session for these guys, and I said, tell me what's going on. Every time it rains, water builds up and the floor leaks. Now tell me, what is the cause of that slip and fall? It's the roof. We jumped all the way down to the process. It's the employee's fault. And I, just as an aside, I said, how much it cost to fix the roof? I don't know, a couple of grand. That was a $5,000 claim. So if we go through the process and we think, we can really do a much more effective job of the incident investigation process. I'm going to speak a little bit about return to work because I think it's absolutely critical. If you are in the workers' compensation system, I know folks like Rudy's are non-subscribers and may not, but for every injury that you have, if it is medical only, no indemnity payments, you get a 70% reduction on that claim when you're calculating your mod. So it is absolutely critical that you have a return to work program. And you've got to have a process and you've got to engage your medical providers. And this is a little form that every medical provider needs to complete. And the key is, in particular, this one little section here, they need to fill it out completely. And it needs to be accurate. And here is, and whether you're non-subscribers or not, the medical provider still needs to go through this process. And I'm going to show you this quick little example here. Maybe. Come on. Here we go. What this doctor does is they fill out and shows where their restrictions are for that employee. So this employee could stand for an hour. They can't sit, they can't kneel, they can't bend, they can't twist, they can't use their left arm. Maybe they could sit for 1 hour. This employee hurt their wrist. And the doctor just started checking boxes. If you don't hold them accountable and say, for real? And make them fill this thing out correctly, guess what? You have a lost time claim because there's nothing that anybody can do that does except for an hour. Maybe we could sit for an hour and roll your utensils together and then that's it. But my point is you got to hold them accountable. I see this all the time. Last thing we're going to talk about is accountability. Several times Pete talked about accountability and how they're holding their staff accountable for accident entries. The number one thing is if you don't have safety and risk management related items, be it your inspection programs or accidents and injuries, as part of your performance reviews, you should do that. Even if it's 5, 10%, what that tells the employee is this is important to the organization. If you have quality and sales and that's it, then that's all they're going to be focused on. So just putting it incrementally, a little bit in there, can really go a long ways because it allows that supervisor to talk about how they're following the safety procedures and doing the training and all the things that you're requiring of them. Store managers, holding them accountable for accidents and injuries is a good thing. I will tell you that OSHA is on a little mantra. They would tell you that if you have a system that is bonusing employees based on not having any accidents, then that could be problematic if that employee filed a complaint, so be careful of that. But it's much better to look at inspections and audits. Audit the findings. That's part of the reasons why Rudy's does that quarterly audit, to make sure they're doing it. And there are safety pieces in there. And so if they're not doing it, they're going to be held accountable for that. And then lastly, again, just like Pete mentioned earlier, are you doing everything we've asked you to do from training and orientation standpoint? And you can hold folks accountable for that. And then the last piece is allocate your costs down to the store level. Or if you've got a big enough operation, maybe the department level. And really there are no rules. And what I mean by that is what you're trying to do is drive the behavior to make people be more safe every day. I was mentioning this to Peter earlier. For those of you that have multiple locations and you got napkins and utensils, and the toilet paper, don't you charge them for that? And that hits their bottom line, am I right? But yet I deal with a lot of companies that do nothing as it relates to accidents and injuries. Nothing. Well, what they might do is allocate the insurance costs. But what I would ask you is, if someone is having all of your claims, if you have multiple locations, in Pete's example, if they got one store that accounts for over half of all their claims, why should they play the same as everybody else when they're dragging everybody down? If they were to go out to the insurance market and buy their own coverage, what would happen? It would not be pretty. And so we've got to figure out a way to not just charge them the insurance costs. We've got to do more than that. We've got to hold them accountable for the injuries themselves. And I'll let Pete speak to what they do in just a second. So we can allocate insurance, we can allocate claims, we can think more big picture, allocate risk management costs. If you have a risk manager or a safety department corporately, to allocate those back out to the field. Figure out where your profit centers are, and that's how you can and should allocate, and using objective measures. So I can slice and dice information lots of different ways. Starts with actually running the numbers. But a lot of folks don't use this one right here. And that is a great measure. Average cost per man hour. Can you relate, can all of your supervisors relate to the folks in New York where I have now given them a 35-cent raise, essentially, because their workers' comp was 35 cents? You follow my logic here? So if you break out their costs by man hour, you can say, you know what, this is how much this store is costing me. Or if I look here in Phoenix, They're doing an awesome job. They're not having any claims. I'm not paying them more per hour. A good measure. So this is a real world allocation system. I want you to kind of think through this and see what you think. So we're allocating the cost for worker injuries in theory. We're going to do this on a quarterly basis. We're going to take all the claims that occurred on a quarterly basis, take a snapshot, and that's what we're going to use for measuring the stores. This is 100 stores all across the United States. Any worker injuries that are reported during that quarter, we're going to take 6% of their payroll and we're going to charge them the 6%. If I don't have any claims, I got zero, no allocation. Does anybody see any problems with this? Anybody? What's that? It penalizes the safe stores. No, they got zero allocation if they have no accidents. What's going to happen? When we look at the numbers, when do you think we had more claims reported? Not at the end, at the beginning, because they held them until the next quarter. We saw multiple stores that have zero claims for a quarter and 6 in the first week of the next quarter. Is that good risk management? Is there any incentive for those employees to return to work? Matter of fact, in this operation, if an employee was injured, they could hire a temp. Guess what? The temp was a corporate cost. It didn't hit the store. There was an incentive for these guys to never bring people back to work. Guess what? Their average cost per claims was off the charts. The return to work was off the charts bad. So we worked with them to create a different process, but once we educated them, I'm not sure who developed it. We had a new management team, so we could be completely critical of this thing. But you can see, you've got to think through what behaviors is that going to drive anytime you develop any kind of allocation system. And in theory, it was, we don't want any claims, but in reality, it was, we're going to have late reporting and we're going to have problems with return to work, which all drove up the cost. After they changed this, within about a 3-year period, their claims were about 25% of what they were before. They did some other stuff, but this was a key piece. Try and use leading indicators, the things that Pete talked about, the inspections, the training, all those things that you can document that are going to lead to being safe, rather than the things that cause the actual dollars. Now, it's a good idea to have both. Pete, how do you hold your stores and your stores accountable for worker injuries?
Well, fortunately, we don't have that many injuries anymore because we have a really good safety program in place. But when we do have injuries, we have lots of forms for them. We have right here, it's called Incident and Accident Reporting. And this is actually 16 pages. And I think that part of the key here is the incident part. We have a lot more incidents than we have accidents. All of our folks know that if a lady slips and falls in the parking lot, no medical attention required, they fill out this incident report. Lots of times the lady would not give us her information. She got in her car and drove off. But at least they have that, they report it, so if something happens down the road, it's not a surprise. Generally that doesn't happen. The accident reporting obviously is much more critical because it has all the details, as Mark was mentioning, but 16 pages worth of information for one incident or one accident is a lot for your managers to do, especially if you've got a line out the door, you're on an hour wait, you're short a cook, who knows what's going on, you have someone chomp down on a piece of bone. That manager has to make sure that they take the time to go get that information and get it sent off to the home office. And we're just fortunate that we have a bunch of great folks working for us that understand the importance of incident and accident reporting. So they're held accountable at the store level. Every accident that they have, obviously if it's an employee, the store gets charged 100%. We don't allocate anything. Mark sends us reports quarterly that we send out to every store that has the accident history on there, the claim history on there, so everybody in the system can see who's doing a great job and who has some opportunities and challenges. And it helps us help them to become more accountable.
Thank you. And they've got a deductible, so it's really easy for them to say that would have been a cost for that store. And so we're going to charge 100% of that back to the store. But I would encourage you, even if your insurance program is guaranteed cost, meaning the insurance company is figure out a way to charge back some of those costs, because you got to hold them accountable. Otherwise, they're going to say, it's just the insurance company. So, you know, I think that's a deterrent. They got to fill out those 16 pages. I've heard that before. You're like, I got this 10-page document I got to fill out if I have an accident. I'm like, you know what my answer to that is? Don't have any accidents. Don't have any injuries. Then you don't have to fill out the forms. So, I mentioned earlier about OSHA. So there's two things related to OSHA that I mentioned about measuring number of incidents, and then the other is post-accident drug testing. So just be careful of that. If you have a policy that's 100%, everybody's going to get tested. OSHA has some issues with that. Now, I've got plenty of companies that have blown them off and say, we don't care, come sue us. But there is a rule out there that kind of speaks to that in having a post-accident just for preventing accidents. So this is more real world and what you can do to manage your risk. This is a combination of several of our clients, their system. Quarterly allocation with a fixed percentage of payroll. We need to charge them back some insurance costs, and so that's the way to do it. And then an additional allocation based on lost time accident, days reported, and their scores on their inspections or their audits. And so we've integrated the leading indicators and the lagging indicators into that process. And it may sound painful, but it really doesn't take that much time. Just figure out what drives the behavior of those folks, and then figure out a system that can encourage that. There are no right answers. The key is to develop a system for your organization. Just like Pete mentioned, related to the operational and training and forms that they've completed, it's got to be yours. You got to own it. So with that, got 15 till. I think we kind of have some time. I don't know. But if you have any questions, do they need to come up to the mic? Probably best, just so we can hear you. There's my email address. I mentioned that accident investigation form. I'd be glad to forward that to you. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that OSHA has a blanket, us using a blanket policy for post-accident injury drug testing is problematic by OSHA. Can you explain a little further?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So the question was, for those that didn't hear that, is OSHA has mentioned about the OSHA post-accident. So OSHA implemented a record-keeping standard 2 years ago. And as part of that, there was a little snippet at the end that talked about the employee's rights as it relates to an accident. And what they said was that having a post-accident, a blanket post-accident drug testing policy was a deterrent for an employee reporting accident. A deterrent for which employees? The ones that are on drugs. But anyhow, that's beside the point. So what they were saying is maybe someone was doing something recreationally over the weekend. If they got hurt on Monday or Tuesday and your policy says they're fired, are they going to report that accident? So what I would encourage and what I've encouraged our clients is what it says is there needs to be at least some semblance of cause. And they always use the example of, well, you wouldn't report you wouldn't have them have a post-accident drug test if they got stung by a bee. And I said, yes, I would. They didn't have all their faculties and they would have swatted that bee. So my point is, you can get within the only two type claims that really you couldn't using you just got to think about it instead of just, we're going to go test them. If they have a carpal tunnel, that's going to be pretty tough because that's over a long period of time. If they have any kind of occupational disease, that's going to be tough. But the other issue that comes, any soft tissue injury, if it happens, if they don't report it immediately, 2-3 days later or a week later, you're going to get in a pickle anyway, because if your policy says they're fired, guess what? They're never returning to work. If that doctor gave them some restrictions. So it becomes an issue. So look at the OSHA. If you go to the OSHA site and the tracking and injury record keeping, it lays it all out. The 300A is part of that, but this is a whole little deal that they decided they needed to add to that. Any other questions? We'll hang out around over here if you got any questions that you don't want everybody else to know about. I want to thank Pete for joining me. Thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of the conference.